Hello, students. Today we are going to study a very important period in the history of Europe, the Age of Revolutions, from 1830 to 1848. Now, you can think of Europe during this time as a kind of pressure cooker. On one side, you had the old rulers, the kings, the emperors, who wanted to hold on to their power and traditions. But on the other side, new ideas, powerful ideas like liberalism and nationalism, were bubbling up. This was a time of great change, a clash of old and new that would completely reshape the continent. So, let's begin. There was a very powerful man at that time, the Austrian Chancellor, Duke Metternich, and he once famously said, "When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold." Now, what did he mean by this? Was he talking about a real illness? No, of course not. He was using a metaphor. The sneeze was revolution in France, and the cold was the revolutionary ideas spreading to other countries. He understood that what happened in France did not stay in France. It spread like a virus. So, this brings us to our main question for today. What exactly was this revolutionary cold? And why did it spread so quickly? To understand the answers, we must first understand what the people were fighting against. What was the old system they wanted to change? To do that, we have to go back in time a little, to the year 1815, right after Napoleon was finally defeated. The powerful countries of Europe came together and tried to press a reset button. They wanted to create what we now call the conservative order. The main political idea guiding them was conservatism. So what is this conservatism? Well, it's a belief that tradition is extremely important. Conservatives valued established institutions like the monarchy, the rule of kings, and the church. They believed in social hierarchy and were against rapid revolutionary change. After all the chaos of the French Revolution, their main goal was stability, even if it meant suppressing freedom. So in 1815, the major powers met at the Congress of Vienna to design this new conservative Europe. What did they decide? First, they restored the old Bourbon dynasty to the throne of France. Then, to prevent France from becoming too powerful again, they set up a series of states on its borders. And the big empires, like Russia, Prussia, and Austria, all got new territories. The main aim, students, was to erase the changes of the French Revolution and bring back the old monarchies. And how did they maintain this order? Through autocratic rule. The rulers had absolute power, and they did not tolerate any dissent. Look at this picture carefully. It's a caricature from that time called the Club of Thinkers. Notice that the men, who are meant to be intellectuals, have muzzles on their mouths. They cannot speak. This shows the reality of censorship. The rulers controlled the newspapers and books to crush any ideas of liberty and freedom. But you cannot suppress ideas forever. And in 1830, the first major crack appeared in this conservative order. And as you might guess, it happened in France. This event is known as the July Revolution. So let's understand this step by step. The Bourbon kings, who were put back on the throne in 1815, started to rule like absolute monarchs again. But the people, especially the liberals, were not willing to accept this. So in July of 1830, they rose up in revolt in Paris. The revolution was successful, the Bourbon king was overthrown, and in his place, a constitutional monarchy was set up, with Louis Philippe as the new king. This was a very important change, because it meant the king's power was now limited by a constitution. And just as Metternich had feared, France had sneezed. The news from Paris did not stay in Paris. It was a spark that spread across Europe, igniting the fires of revolution in other countries as well. This spark from France gave energy to another very powerful idea: nationalism. Now, what is nationalism? It is the belief that people who share a common language, culture, and history belong to a single nation and should have their own independent state. People started to question why they were being ruled by large, multinational empires. This led to a chain reaction of uprisings across Europe. Let's look at two important examples. First, Belgium. Inspired by the July Revolution in France, an uprising took place in Brussels. It was successful, and Belgium broke away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands to become an independent country. A different kind of struggle happened in Greece. The Greeks had been fighting a long war of independence since 1821 to free themselves from the control of the Ottoman Empire. So you see, both were nationalist struggles, but they followed different paths. The Greek War of Independence got a lot of support from other parts of Europe. Why? Because many educated Europeans had great respect for ancient Greek culture as the cradle of European civilization. Art became a very important tool in gathering support. This famous painting by the French artist Eugène Delacroix shows the suffering of the Greek people. By dramatizing their plight, created sympathy for the Greek cause all over Europe.
And the support was not just in words or paintings. People actually went to fight. The famous English poet Lord Byron not only organized funds for the Greek struggle, but he also went to Greece to fight in the war, where he died from a fever in 1824. This shows how passionately people across Europe supported the idea of Greek independence.
So we have seen the political side of these revolutions, but for people to be willing to fight and die for a nation, they must first feel a connection to it. This is where culture becomes very important. The feeling of nationalism was fueled by a major cultural movement of the time, known as Romanticism. Now, when we say Romanticism, we are not talking about romance. Romanticism was a cultural movement that criticized reason and science. Instead, it focused on emotions, intuition, and feelings. Romantic artists and poets wanted to create a sense of a shared culture and a common past. They believed that this shared heritage was the true basis of a nation. So, how did they build this feeling of a shared nation? They used the culture of the common people. They collected and recorded folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances. They believed these things expressed the true spirit of the nation. Think of the fairy tales collected by the Grimm brothers in Germany, or the use of local, vernacular language instead of the language of the rulers. Even music, like the operas of Karol Karpinski in Poland, was used to celebrate the national struggle. A German philosopher, Johann Gottfried Herder, had a special term for this. He called it Volksgeist. It's a German word that means spirit of the nation or spirit of the people. Herder believed that the true culture of Germany was not with the elite, but could be discovered among the common people, das Volk as he called them, in their songs and their poetry.
A very good example of this is Poland. You see, during this time, Poland did not exist as an independent country. It had been divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. But the Polish people kept their national identity alive through their culture. Even though the Polish language was banned from schools under Russian rule, it was used in church gatherings. National dances like the Polonaise and Mazurka became symbols of resistance. Here, culture was not just entertainment, it was a weapon.
So, after looking at all these struggles and all these ideas, what was the final result? What is the legacy of this age of revolutions? Let us summarize the main points. This is very important. First, the conservative order that was set up in 1815 was proven to be weak. It could be challenged. Second, two ideas, liberalism and nationalism, emerged as the most powerful forces for change in Europe. Third, these revolutions were often led by the educated, liberal middle class. Fourth, we learned that culture, through the Romantic movement, played a very important role in creating a feeling of national identity. And finally, although many of these revolutions failed in the short term, they laid the foundation for the creation of nation-states later in the century. So the years between 1830 and 1848 were a period of great upheaval. The revolutionary fire was lit, and even when it was put out in one place, it continued to smolder. This leads us to our next big question. How did these struggles eventually lead to the unification of countries like Germany and Italy? But that is a story for our next lesson.